Life on the Ramona Coaster by Ramona Singer. Dedication. This book is dedicated to my daughter, Avery. I am truly blessed to have you in my life. My mother gave me the gift of faith, and you are my strength and inspiration. You have been so supportive of me through this trying time. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine having a daughter as wonderful as you. The love I have for you is beyond comprehension. Introduction, a work in progress. Along with the rest of America, I first heard of the Real Housewives in 2006 when Bravo debuted its reality show about the glamorous lives of a group of different affluent women in Southern California. Little did I know that 1 year later, Bravo would create an equally successful spin-off show set in Manhattan, and I would be cast as one of the 5 original Real Housewives of New York City. When we started filming the show, I was happily married. I had a successful 7 figure business, and I was the mother of a beautiful 12-year-old daughter. I never could have anticipated that I was about to enter the most exciting and dramatic chapter of my life. The first episode aired in March of 2008, and over the course of that season, Bethany Frankel, Jill Zarin, Luann de Lesseps, Alex McCord, and I would embark on a journey that would forever change all of our lives. Starring in a reality television show is a truly humbling experience. We open our lives to the scrutiny of the cameras, the media, and millions of viewers who alternately judge, adore, revile, idolize, and ridicule us, sometimes all in the course of one episode. What I never expected when I signed on to do the show, however, was that it would give me the unique opportunity to examine my life from a completely new perspective. Through watching my behavior and my interactions with the other women on the show, I became acutely aware that my past was influencing my present in ways that I am still just beginning to understand. My unfiltered personality was shaped by a dysfunctional childhood, during which my father verbally and sometimes even physically abused my mother. For most of my life, I kept the truth of my unhappy past a secret. Like many people who have been in abusive situations, I was embarrassed and ashamed. I thought that if I told my friends and colleagues what I had gone through as a child, they would judge me, disassociate themselves from me, or think I was inferior to them. Most importantly, I did not want anyone to think of me as a victim, because I'm not. The first time I spoke publicly about my childhood was during the taping of the season 2 reunion episode. In response to a viewer question, I revealed for the first time that I grew up in a family where my mother was verbally abused by my father on a regular basis. It was liberating to let go of this secret, and I decided to open up even more the following season. Over lunch at Fig and Olive, a chic Mediterranean restaurant on the Upper East Side, I told my close friend Joni, and in turn the 1.75 million viewers who tuned in to watch that episode, what it was like to grow up in a fractured household. My childhood memories were marked by constant fighting, screaming, and crying. For most of my life, I hated my father. I hated him for hurting my mother and for making her cry. I hated him for not making me feel loved. I hated him for not providing me with a normal childhood. Although I was never physically abused, the events I witnessed in my childhood scarred me emotionally and destroyed my relationship with my father. They also shaped the woman I was to become and tainted my perception of relationships. After my mother died, my father and I grew even further apart than we already were. Then, 3 years later, the wildest thing happened. I invited him to spend Christmas with us at our home in Southampton, and we actually got along. After a lifetime of resentment, I made peace with him. Then, just 2 weeks later, he died. Ironically, just when I had finally bonded with my father and he had showed me the love and affection I had been craving my entire life, I lost him for good. Though the loss was heartbreaking, through his death, I was released from the horrible feelings I had been suppressing, the anger, the insecurities, and the shame. Suddenly, a huge burden had been lifted off my shoulders. I will never forget how I felt at that bittersweet moment. It was as if I had finally woken up from a horrible nightmare. the kind where you know you are dreaming, but you can't wake yourself up. I had been weighed down and imprisoned by my unresolved emotions towards my father. Now that he was gone, I felt reborn, vibrant, and alive. I was renewed. It was a powerful awakening. I became introspective and began examining all of the different parts of my life: my relationship with my husband, my career, my sense of faith, my friendships, my self image, even my lifestyle. I wanted to shout from the rooftop that I was free and open to new experiences and ways to improve myself. After I shared my story on the show and wrote about it on my blog, I received hundreds of emails. Viewers could not believe that I had kept my secret hidden for so long. They finally understood why I sometimes had such an unedited and unfiltered personality. Many wrote to me wanting to know how they could renew their own lives and what they could do to make peace with their pasts, their parents, their spouses, their friends, their exes, or their body images. At that point in my life, I was on top of the world, and I thought I had life all figured out. And then in 2013, the unthinkable happened. My marriage of over 20 years publicly unraveled. Having your husband betray you is the worst feeling in the world. I wish it on no one. It made me realize that in life there are no certainties. Every moment is precious, and you can't take anything or anyone for granted. We are all constantly changing and evolving. We are all works in progress. The important thing is to recognize when you have reached a turning point and to allow yourself to embrace change. I have learned that renewal is an ongoing journey, and just when you think you have all the answers, life throws you a curveball. Anyone can reinvent themselves at any age, no matter who you are, how old you are, where you come from, or what you have been through. It's never too late to experience true renewal. Very few things in life are ever so bad that you can't wake up, dust yourself off, and move toward where you want to be. All it takes is positive attitude, an open mind to discover the obstacles that are weighing you down, and a willingness to dig deep within yourself and embrace change. I am opening up about my life, my successes, and my failures in this book because I want to share the experiences from which I draw my confidence and determination. No one is perfect, especially not me. We all go through breakups and we all go through ups and downs in life. I've been through a lot. I have learned everything. I have earned everything I have, and I take nothing for granted. Nothing can hold you back if you don't want it to. When you wake up in the morning, you have a choice. You can either control your fate and work towards renewing certain aspects of your life, or you can hide under the covers and complain about your misfortunes. My personal renewal is a journey that is ongoing to this day. I am and will always be a work in progress. 'Twas the night before Christmas, Chapter 1. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, except me. Actually, it was the day before Christmas Eve, 2008, and I was anxiously watching the clock and pacing around the kitchen of the beautiful Southampton home I have shared with my husband Mario since our daughter Avery was 6 months old. As I fumbled around a drawer looking for a bottle opener, I thought about all the holidays we had spent in that house every Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, and birthday for more than a decade. It is a home built on a foundation of love and girded with warm memories of lazy summer days spent by the pool and evenings entertaining friends. It is the home I always dreamt of as a child. It was the home I never had. This house was my sanctuary, my refuge from the hustle and bustle of city life, but it was about to be penetrated by a potentially hostile force, and I was a nervous wreck. For the first time since my mother had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier, they had invited my father to spend Christmas with us. His health and our relationship had steadily deteriorated since her death, and I couldn't even remember the last time we had spoken. I had no idea what kind of mood he would be in. Would he pick on me all week? Would he badger me with below the belt jabs? Would there be screaming matches in front of Avery and our other guests? Having located the bottle opener, I poured myself a glass of Pinot Grigio and tried to relax. I closed myself, I closed my eyes and took a long sip. It's going to be okay, I told myself. But I wasn't convinced. When the doorbell rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I gulped down the last of my wine and placed the empty glass on the marble countertop. As I stood, I looked over at Mario with a smirk and rolled my eyes, as if to say, "This is going to be a disaster, and it is all your fault." A few weeks earlier, he had suggested that I invite my father to spend Christmas with us. "You know, Ramona, your father's getting older. His health is failing. We don't know how much longer he has to live. I think it's important for Avery to spend the holiday with the only grandparent she has left," he reasoned. My initial reaction was, "You cannot be serious." I wasn't comfortable with the idea of having my father in my home, especially now that my mother was gone. The last time he visited us in Southampton, he drank too much and insulted some friends who had invited us all to dinner in their home. It was such an unpleasant experience that I swore I would never let him in my house again. I had only tolerated being around him in the past for my mother's sake. Now that she had passed away, there was no longer any reason to subject myself to his negative energy and verbal abuse. "I know you," Mario said, trying to reassure me. "You will regret it if you never get to see him again, never get to talk to him again. Do it for yourself. You need closure. You'll never forgive yourself for not seeing him." He was speaking from experience. He had made a similar peace with his own father just before he died. Mario's father was an austere German Italian man who was very stern with his children. The relationship was always tense, but it became even more strained because they worked together. After I gave birth to Avery, he started to get very sick, and it turned out that he had cancer. We would visit him in the hospital, and he was so miserable, he would say, "Someone just take a gun and shoot me." He deteriorated quickly, and Mario became his father's caretaker. He would feed him and help him go to the bathroom. They spent a lot of time together in those final days and bonded. For the first time in his life, his father told Mario that he loved him. He died the day after Avery's christening, but because they had that time together, Mario was able to find the closure he needed. So there I was, against my better judgment, about to welcome into my home the man I had spent my entire adult life trying to keep at arm's length. My heart was pounding. As I passed our beautifully decorated tree, I took a deep breath, drawing strength from its familiar piney smell. Half expecting an ogre on the other side, I braced myself and opened the door. No monster, just an old man, looking more frail and diminished than I had ever seen him, accompanied by his grandson, my nephew, Victor, and his mother, Gabriella, who had been serving as his caretaker. "Hi, Daddy," I said, timidly forcing myself to smile. "How are you?" He looked old, weak, and tired, but there was no sparkle in his emerald green eyes. But even though he was now a sick man in his 70s, when I looked into those eyes, I could still see shades of the man who verbally abused my mother my entire life. I shuddered as I recalled a moment that would irrevocably shape the woman I have become. I am 4.5 years old. We live in a quaint Cape Cod style home in a traditional middle class suburban town. Think Wisteria Lane, far from the Upper East Side. The streets are lined with row after row of houses with plenty of neighbors and children around. Our backyard, surrounded by a white picket fence, is bursting with an endless variety of colorful flowers. It is the middle of a sunny afternoon. I am playing with my dolls in the living room when I am jolted by screams coming from the adjacent room. For a moment, I think I must be having a nightmare. But then I see my mother, or at least a woman who looks like my mother, sprinting towards me. Her porcelain white face is covered in crimson blood, her straight brown hair tangled, and her brown eyes are wide open, glistening with tears. "Ramona, call the police," she screams. I'm frozen in disbelief. I can't move or speak. Is this really happening? Am I dreaming? I wish it were a nightmare, but it wasn't. This terrified woman is my mother. She screams again, "Ramona, call the police." I just stare up at her. I drop my doll and run to the square end table. I look at the phone, then at my mom, then at the phone again. I am frightened and confused. "Mommy, I don't know how to use the telephone," I say, shaking my head. "I don't know how to use it." A hulking figure appears in the doorway of the living room. I lean forward and stare at him. It is a large, muscular man with blonde hair, piercing green eyes, and broad shoulders. I rub my eyes, hoping to clear away the terrifying image. He lunges toward my mother. My brown eyes open wider. That scary man is my daddy, I think to myself in disbelief. The man who takes me to church every Sunday. The man who passes around the parish's collection basket. The man who takes me to the local bakery to buy cake and cookies. I watch in horror as he pulls my mother's arm and yanks her out of the living room as if she is one of my lifeless rag dolls. This is the first time I ever saw the monster my father could become when he was drinking. Sadly, it wasn't the last. I don't recall my father hitting my mother again until I am 8 years old. That's when his aggressive behavior becomes chronic and the abuse escalates to a whole new level. When I am in second grade, my family moves from our cozy suburban home to a large 4-bedroom house. In the country, my father, a successful engineer at IBM, is transferred from Poughkeepsie to Kingston, New York. Rather than relocate us to a suburban town like Hyde Park or Rhinebeck, he decides to custom build a house in the isolated rural town of Statsburg. Our new home is literally in the middle of the woods. Our backyard is overrun with squirrels and rabbits. Our nearest neighbor lives in another isolated house nearly a quarter of a mile away. To the left, 75 clear acres separate us from the rest of civilization. There are no neighbors for my mom to talk to, no one to hear her scream and cry while my father abuses her, no one she can run to for help. I think my father planned it this way. We are all alone. We are at his mercy. The next few years of my life are a blur of nightmarish memories, punctuated by my father drinking too much, then drunkenly abusing and berating my mother, an endless cycle of screaming, fighting, and crying. I feel like I am living in a war zone. One night, we are all sitting at the kitchen table eating dinner. My father has just returned from work. He reeks of scotch. Tonight, as usual, he has stopped at a bar with friends for shots of Scottish whiskey before heading home to terrorize us. Although he would never admit that he has a drinking problem, my father is a functioning alcoholic and a mean drunk. As I shovel buttery potatoes into my mouth, I watch my father slap down his napkin and begin yelling at my mother. I grab my 2 sisters and brother and run upstairs. My siblings are crying and confused. As the eldest, I feel it is my responsibility to comfort and calm them down. We pile into my tiny bed and hide under the pink quilt, shielding ourselves from the lopsided civil war that is being fought downstairs. But we can't block out the battle sounds. We hear glasses being broken, ceramic plates shattered against the wall, and my father's strong fist punching the table. Over the loud banging, I heard my mother's small voice pleading, "Stop, please stop." But my father rages on, drowning her fragile voice out as if she is an inferior servant in his majestic kingdom. In desperation, she screams, "If you don't stop, I'll leave you. I'll divorce you." This actually makes my father, ever the Catholic, pause for a moment. It's the 1960s. No decent Christian woman would ever divorce a handsome, respectable man who fathered her 4 beautiful children, had a successful job, and put a roof over her head and food on the table. Besides, she has no money. Knowing this, he just mocks her. "Where are you going to go?" He laughs loudly. "You have no money. Who would want you with your 4 kids?" Feigning a confidence I know she does not have, my mother screams back, "I don't care. I'm getting away from you." He grabs her by the arm, looks her straight in the eye, and says, "If you leave me, I will find you wherever you are. And when I do, I will kill you." We are traumatized. Our nerves are shattered. That night, I wet my bed. My sister and brothers do too. The next day, it happens all over again. My father drinks his scotch and then berates my mother, while my siblings and I hide under our covers and wet the bed. It happens again and again and again. I feel powerless, helpless. Night after night, I fell asleep to the sounds of their fighting. Morning after morning, I wake up in a bed of my own urine. Day after day, I go to school and pretend that my mother is happy and my father loves us. I am anxious and frightened all the time, but more than that, I am ashamed. I can't tell anyone what is going on in our own home. I can't invite friends over because I am terrified that they will witness my father's drunken, abusive behavior. I can't sleep at my friend's house because I worry that I will soil their sheets or my sleeping bag. Every day I pray, "Please, God, please make this stop. Please make my father stop picking on my mother. I ask over and over again, why is this happening to me? What did I ever do wrong to deserve a life like this? But the abuse continues. My father's aggression gets worse and worse until he pushes my mother to the breaking point. One Saturday afternoon, my sister's brother and I are playing in the living room downstairs. Once again, we hear my father screaming at my mother. He's yelling at her for spending too much money on groceries. Beneath his stern, booming voice, we hear distressed cries from my mother. Stop it! You're going to kill me! Stop! Then silence. It is a silence so deafening that I question why I no longer hear my mother crying or my father shouting. Although we usually run and hide when they fight, the initial desperation in her voice and the fear that my father might, or actually did, finally kill my mother compels us to run into the kitchen. There we see our father. His eyes are venomous and he is breathing heavily. He grabs my petite 5'1" mother and throws her across the tiled floor. She is whimpering, begging him to stop, but he doesn't. In a wild rage, he picks her up and flings her defenseless body against the refrigerator. We are crying, jumping up and down, and screaming, Stop, Daddy, stop! But he is so oblivious to us. He drags my mother by her long brown hair and thrusts her back and forth. We scream louder, Daddy, stop! 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 Finally, he looks at us, his eyes coming into focus as if he is coming out of a trance. He storms out of the kitchen, grabs his car keys, and drives away. My mother is hysterical. We are leaving now. I have to get away from him. She gathers us up and herds us outside. We pile into our wood-paneled station wagon with nothing but the clothes on our backs. Where are we going? We ask from the back. She says nothing. She is just shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. She's swerving all over the road. I have never been so scared. I wonder if I will ever go back home. About 30 minutes later, we are standing in the driveway of her girlfriend Eleanor's house. My mother is begging for a place to stay, somewhere we can hide from my father. On Sunday, my sister's brother and I play with Eleanor's 4 children. Just like other normal kids, we play kickball in the street and Monopoly inside the house. We never talk about what happened the night before. We never even acknowledge it. It's as if we have all silently agreed to bury this memory, thinking that if we don't talk about it, we can pretend it never really happened. Looking back, it's remarkable that what the young mind will do to protect itself from trauma. The next morning, we go to school in Eleanor's children's clothes, underwear and all. That afternoon, my mother picks us up from school and takes us back to our house. She tells us that our father is not coming home. He is never going to hurt her again. I am relieved that she has stood up for herself and that we don't have to be frightened anymore. 3 months later, my father is back. Over the next few years, the physical abuse stops, but the verbal assaults continue. My mother and father sleep in separate rooms, claiming that my father's constant snoring keeps my mom awake at night, but I know better. I guess the time away sent a message to my father that my mother meant business, that she wouldn't take his physical abuse anymore. But that doesn't stop him from verbally attacking her or his children. He replaces the punching with nonstop derogatory attacks, and as time goes on, these assaults worsen. It is as if he is playing a game of chicken with himself, in which he constantly dares to see how aggressive, offensive, and confrontational he can be without becoming physical. Although these attacks leave no bodily scars, they penetrate our psyches and our souls on a much deeper level. One night he pushes me so far that I snap. I am 15. My mother and I are cooking in our large, yellow, eaten kitchen. I am standing next to the antique stove preparing the salad while my father stands at the opposite counter near the sink. My father walks into the room and demands to know when dinner will be served. My mother tries to placate him, but the more submissive she is, the more he bullies her. He's confrontational and belligerent, and as he gains power from his rage, he begins to widen his attack. Suddenly, the abuse isn't only directed toward my mother, it is also directed toward me. My father growls that I am useless and I will never amount to anything. He calls me cruel and demeaning names, some of which I don't fully understand. I try to tune out his voice, the hateful words he utters. But no matter how hard I try, his badgering is getting to me. He gets in my face. I can smell the rancid alcohol on his breath and see the rancor in his eyes. Then He gets in my mother's face, alternating scathing insults between us. Something he says, I can't recall what, hits a nerve. I snap. My life flashes before my eyes. As if I am rewinding a horror movie, I see images of my mother's battered face begging me to call the police, my father throwing plates, my mother being pulled by her hair, my mother grabbing me so that we can run away from my father, and finally her defeated face as she welcomes him back into our home. I feel so cheated, cheated out of a normal childhood and a loving father. I resent him for exposing me to all this violence and emotional abuse. At that time, I promised myself that I am not going to be a victim. I am not going to take his abuse. I realize I have to stop him. I have to put him in his place, or he will continue to bully me for the rest of my life. I am going to give it right back to him and not back down. I look over at my mother. She continues to prepare dinner as if there isn't a malicious man berating her in front of her own daughter. I see red. My anger grows like a restless brush fire. Why is she just standing there? Why isn't she fighting back or standing up for herself? I don't get it. How can she stay married to this abusive man? Maybe she's given up, but I haven't. I have to protect her. Sooner or later, my father is going to cross that line again, and I never want him to hurt her the way he did that night in the kitchen. In that instant, I resolve to stop my father before he takes it too far. I am aware he is yelling, but the sound of his voice is just background noise now. Slowly, I open the narrow drawer where my mother keeps the cutlery. I know exactly what I am looking for, the biggest kitchen knife with the longest and thickest blade. I pull the largest butcher knife out of the drawer and focus on the sharp blade as it slices through the head of lettuce in front of me. I remind myself, I'm not going to take his shit. I'm not going to be a victim anymore. Then, without hesitation, I lunge toward him, point the sharp blade directly at his face, and scream, Stop it! Stop it right now! My eyes grow wild. Stop it right now, or I swear I will take this knife and shove it into your neck. He backs away, startled. But then his mouth twists into a devilish smile and he begins to laugh. This is not the reaction I was expecting. I pull the knife away and take a step back. It all happened so fast. I can't believe what I just did. I don't know who is more shocked, my father, my mother, or me. In retrospect, I think my father laughed because he liked that I threatened him. In his warped, sadistic mind, he was probably amused by my behavior. Maybe he even respected me a little for standing up to him. The adrenaline starts to wear off. My body shakes. I am trembling and cannot control myself. My mind is flooded with terrifying questions. What if he takes his anger at me out on my mother? What would have happened if he had challenged me? Would I have actually stabbed my father in the neck? Although he is abusive, I don't want him to die, and I certainly didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to send a message. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be defenseless and afraid. I wanted to threaten and test him the same way he threatened and tested my mother and me. I wanted to watch him back down in true fear. True to form in our family, nothing is said after this incident. No one acknowledges what happened. We don't sit around the table that night and talk about how naughty it was that Ramona pulled a knife on Daddy. I'm not sent to a therapist for my anger issues. Instead, we treat it like any other violent episode that occurs in our dysfunctional household. We just sweep it under the carpet and pretend that it never happened. In fact, this is the first time I am sharing this story with anyone. The day I become my mother's protector, and in that moment, I lost forever what was left of my childhood. I lost the typical mother daughter relationship where the mother protects her daughter. I lost my innocence. But in its place, I gained a sense of empowerment and independence. I became my own advocate, my own protector. On that day, I realized I was on my own. Now, here I was, so many years later, standing in the doorway of my own home, staring into the face of the man who had robbed me of my childhood. I shook off the memories and gave him a hug, suppressing my anxiety and turbulent emotions. This was going to be a long week. I led my father into the corner guest room where he was to stay for the next 5 days because it was on the ground level and he could no longer walk upstairs. At 74, my father had diabetes and had been suffering from kidney failure. He was visibly weak from the dialysis treatments he was receiving 3 times a week. Prior to this visit, I had arranged for him to continue these treatments in Southampton with a local doctor. This was no easy task. Try finding a good doctor during the holidays. Well, try finding one who isn't spending it with his family or vacationing in Aspen or St. Bart's. Every decent doctor who hadn't left town for the holiday was fully booked, and I had to beg and plead for one to fit my father in. But that's another story. I asked Avery to take her look-alike cousin Victor and his mother to their rooms upstairs. Bye, Opa, she said excitedly as she left the room. Avery always called my father Opa, which is German for grandpa. I choked up. I'd almost forgotten how much she adored him. Ever since she was a little girl, she wondered why we really rarely saw him. She would say, Mom, I don't understand why you always say your father was such a mean man. I think Grandpa's really nice. Of course, I couldn't tell her what he did to my mother or to me. I only told her, Avery, you're right. He's very nice to you, and I'm glad you have a relationship with him. But he's mellowed over the years. He wasn't that nice to me when I was a kid. I wished I could feel the way she did about his arrival, but there was too much water under the bridge. It was difficult for me to watch her affectionately welcome my father into our home. But how could I begrudge my own daughter and the relationship I never had? I understood for the first time that Mario was right. It was important for Avery that I try to set aside my issues with my father for the moment and give her this holiday with her last living grandparent. The past few years had been hard on all of us. First, we lost Mario's mother, and then my own mother 3 years later. Both women had been a huge presence in Avery's life. When she was 2 years old, Mario's mother, Carla, came to live with us. At the age of 81, she had suffered a stroke on the operating table during triple bypass surgery. She lost some of her eyesight, so she could no longer read or play piano and needed rehab to learn how to fold a fork and knife again. Hold a fork and knife again. Mario decided she would stay with us for the summer. That visit stretched into months and then years as she began to show signs of dementia. Carla ended up living with us for 4 years, and we took care of her. I don't want to say that I didn't have a second child because of her, but having her live with us was as much responsibility as having another child. When Avery was in kindergarten, Carla developed a clot in her leg. The circulation stopped, gangrene set in, and the doctors told us they had to amputate her leg or she would die. It was such a heart-wrenching decision for Mario to have to make. I remember him saying, I don't know what to do. If they don't amputate, she'll die of gangrene, and that's a horrible death. But if they do, she's going to be so devastated, it will kill her anyways. Carla was a beautiful, elegant, vain Italian woman. She dressed in couture, played concert piano, and was a painter and a singer. Mario just kept saying, How can I tell my mother they have to cut off her leg? It was so sad. Because of the stroke and dementia, Carla had already required round the clock care. But once she lost her leg, we had no choice but to put her into a home. After that, she lost her will to live. She stopped eating. She wouldn't drink anything. When she passed away, we had a viewing at Frank Campbell Funeral Chapel on Madison Avenue. We had a closed casket, but at the end of the day, after after everyone but us had gone home, Avery looked at Mario and me and said, I want to see Nanina. I want to say goodbye. We opened up the casket, lifted Avery up, and she leaned down to kiss her grandmother goodbye. After that, I promised Avery things were going to get better, and I really thought they would. But unfortunately, soon after my mother was diagnosed with leukemia, when Avery was little, my mom used to come to leukemia. When Avery was little, my mother used to come to the city every Monday to take care of her while I was working. So Avery was as close with her as she was with Mario's mother. She was so angry, she said to me, You told me things were going to get better, Mommy. You lied to me. For years, we watched my mother fight the cancer, struggling to hang on, but it was a losing battle, and she died 3 years later. On top of losing Mario's mother, it felt like a 1-2 punch. Mario set my father's one small bag down in the closet. Are you hungry? I asked him, already knowing the answer. Your granddaughter and I prepared a nice lunch for you, linguine with fresh clam sauce. My father looked thrilled. He loved good food. I was relieved because things seemed to be going smoothly so far. Despite my misgivings, I intended to do everything in my power to ensure that he had a good time during that visit, even if it meant coordinating outpatient dialysis treatment and spending countless hours in the kitchen. We walked through our festively decorated living room, which features oversized windows that looked out on a majestic pond in the backyard. The smell of fresh pine from the Christmas tree and garland permeated the room. My father didn't say one positive thing about my home or Christmas decorations. Instead, he headed straight into the large eat-in kitchen and sat at the head of the country table, Mario's usual seat, like a king on his throne. This may not seem like a big deal, but the fact that he didn't compliment my home and just plopped down in my husband's seat made my blood boil. His sheer presence made me feel so anxious and inadequate that everything my father did or didn't do became magnified in my mind. On some level, I understood that this was more about seating arrangements and more than about seating arrangements and decorations. This was about him asserting his dominance in my home. But in that moment, I was too aggravated to think objectively. I walked past the island countertop and resumed my position at the stove. I stood in front of the Viking free range, carefully stirring the homemade pasta and aromatic clam sauce. Although my back was to my father, I could feel his green eyes studying me, staring at me. Childhood memories flooded my mind, memories of baking pies, cakes, and cookies in the kitchen in the hopes of receiving his love and approval. My father didn't pay much attention to my sisters or me. He had no interest in our talents and accomplishments. The only time he showed me any love or affection was when I baked him desserts. My mother was a fantastic cook, but she wasn't much of a baker. Since we weren't allowed to eat processed box cakes, I became the family's Betty Crocker, and I taught myself how to bake from scratch. I would walk down the road to pick apples at the nearby orchard and use them to make homemade apple crisps. Other times, I would make banana bread and cookies. After dinner, my father would eat these treats, and I could tell by the sparkle in his eyes that he was happy with what I had made, that he was finally enjoying something that I did. Finally, this was always such a bittersweet moment for me. On one hand, I was overjoyed that my father was acknowledging me, even if it was just for baking. But a huge part of me never understood why he didn't express his appreciation in words, or better yet, with a hug or kiss. Was it too much to ask for some words of recognition or a small compliment? A simple, great job, Ramona, would have made me feel so cherished. All I ever wanted was to feel worthy of his love. I poured the pasta into a stainless steel colander. As the steam rose up in my face, I closed my eyes and attempted to conjure up a fond memory of my father, but I couldn't. I suddenly heard his voice. Ramona. My heart was pounding. I turned, bracing myself for some kind of dig. That smells delicious. I was taken aback. A compliment? For more than 40 years, I had longed for this moment. It may sound strange, but with just those four simple words, I began to relax for the first time all day. My father was actually making an effort to be nice to me. I wondered if he even realized how much those words meant to me. I shrugged my shoulders and thought that maybe this won't be such a bad week after all. I plated the linguine and clam sauce while Avery sprinkled fresh lemon and parsley over each portion. Mario opened an expensive bottle of Pinot Grigio. I looked at him, telepathically telling him to only pour my father a small glass. I didn't want my father to drink too much. I didn't want any fighting. I didn't want my daughter to see the mean confrontational side of my father. Over the next hour, we ate, drank, and chatted. We behaved as if we were a normal family. There were no plates flying, no fists slamming down on the table, no demeaning insults. So far, so good. Midway through the meal, my father asked about the menu for Christmas Eve. Ugh, that's so typical, I thought to myself. We haven't even finished eating, and he's already thinking about his next meal. Well, at least he isn't yelling at me. So, Ramona, what are we having for dinner tomorrow night? Before I could answer, he continued, Shrimp. It's tradition to have shrimp for Christmas Eve dinner. That's what we're having. Okay, Dad, I said to appease him. I'll get shrimp. We'll have shrimp. But not just ordinary shrimp, he smiled mischievously. It has to be colossal shrimp, and you'll need at least two per person. Come on, Dad, we don't need colossal shrimp. Besides, they didn't have them at the fish market when I meant to get these clams. I paused and took a deep breath. I don't think my father, in his 70-plus years, ever served, let alone ate colossal shrimp in his own home. Money was always a huge source of tension between my parents. My father was a cheap man who constantly berated my mother about money. He would come home and scream at her for spending too much on groceries, never acknowledging that she was shopping for a family of six. I doubt he would have allowed her to indulge on colossal shrimp with his money. That's it, I decided. I am not going to let him dictate our Christmas Eve dinner. Who is he to come marching into my house demanding that he has served colossal shrimp? He'll eat whatever I serve him. He's lucky I even invited him. I took a deep breath and exhaled as I tried to clear my head of negativity. I reminded myself that he did seem like he was trying. But I can try another store, I said calmly. The next day, Avery and I drove to the Clam Man, our favorite seafood market in Southampton. As I approached the long glass counter, I scanned the selection of shrimp. I pointed to the extra large one and asked the saleswoman for a couple dozen. Immediately, I felt Avery tugging on my arm. She whispered, "Mom, the tag says they're extra large, not colossal. Opa wants colossal shrimp." I decided to humor Avery and ask the saleswoman, "You don't by any chance have colossal shrimp?" "Funny you should ask," she responded. "We're catering a party this evening and happen to have 40 extra colossal shrimp downstairs." "Could you bring one up?" I asked. I had no idea what they even looked like. The woman scurried to the lower level of the store and returned with this huge, ugly, insect like creature with beady eyes and long pink whiskers. The freakish thing was as big as a lobster and cost nearly as much. Okay, I'll take 12. Butterflied, cleaned, and deveined. Plus, I'll take 3 quarts of your homemade lobster bisque. The saleswoman put the slimy, translucent shrimp on the scale. Each one weighed at least a third of a pound, if not more. Despite my aggravation, I did want to please my father. I craved his approval. I always have. We pulled up in front of our home. Before I could even put the car in park, Avery grabbed the bag of shrimp and ran to the house excitedly. "Opa, we got colossal shrimp. We got colossal shrimp." Inside, my father enveloped Avery in a bear hug. "Wait till you have these. You will not believe how delicious they are." He smiled, and I noticed that sparkle in his eye was back. I could see he was happy, but I was hoping for more. I felt empty. I knew I was being foolish, but at that point, the shrimp had become more than just freakishly large crustaceans. They resented my father's approval and his respect. I knew it was ridiculous, but a part of me actually believed that if I brought home those shrimp, my father would finally show me he loved me. Ever since I was a little girl watching reruns of Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, I dreamt of having a father who came home from work in a good mood, asked me about my day, sat at the kitchen table with me while I did my homework, and then tucked me in at night. When I was laying out a small fortune for those colossal shrimp, I pictured myself presenting my father with the treasure I had brought home for him. He would be so excited and proud that he would finally compliment me and even give me a hug. I was wrong. He hugged only my daughter. Once again, he didn't acknowledge me or show me any affection. I tried to remind myself that we were making progress, but I couldn't help wondering, why can't he hug me the way he hugs Avery? Why do I have to do for him to show me what do I have to do for him to show me some love and affection? Am I so naive as to think that my father can change? For the rest of the day, Avery and I prepared Christmas Eve dinner while my father sat at the head of the kitchen table. Mario played jolly Christmas carols throughout the house. We sang along while we baked butter cookies from scratch. I looked at my father, who had resumed his place at the head of the table. He was smiling at me and humming along to the music. My favorite thing to do at Christmas is to make cookies with my daughter. It's a Singer family tradition that began when Avery was 2 years old. As I carefully rolled out the creamy dough on the marble countertop, the smell of sweet cream butter and vanilla extract transported me back in time. I smiled as I recalled my younger self meticulously shaping and cookie cutting the malleable dough, as Avery happily poured as many red and green sprinkles as she could fit into her tiny pale hands, and then carefully sprinkled them on top of each cookie. The moment they cooled from the oven, she would run to her daddy and give him a cookie. He was the taste master. And even if Mario wasn't hungry, he'd devour the cookie and give his little girl a kiss on the cheek, hug her tight, and tell her what a fantastic job she did. And here we were, years later, still baking these delectable treats. But now my father had joined us in this family tradition. Avery delicately decorated each cookie with a faint touch, as if each buttery confection was a work of art. She handed my father one of her tiny masterpieces for his appraisal. He had become the taste master. He had taken Mario's role, first his seat, then his title, and he appeared to be enjoying every minute of it. Come to think of it, so was I. Ramona, he said, can I have another cookie? They smell great and they taste even better. You know you aren't allowed to eat too many of them, not with your diabetes. Come on, it's Christmas. Besides, my beautiful daughter and granddaughter made them, he said to Avery with a wink. I walked over to the table and handed him another cookie. He ate it happily, and this time it wasn't Avery who got a hug. It was me. As we finished baking 100 butter cookies, I felt like my father's arms were still clasped around my waist. Although it may sound strange, this invisible hug lit me up inside and gave me a sense of hope that my father and I might actually get along that week. As I breaded the colossal shrimp, I closed my eyes and hoped this feeling would never end. As the day wore on, I was full of mixed emotions. Although I was ecstatic that my father and I were getting along, there was a part of me that questioned everything he did and wondered why he was never able to be this type of father when I was a little girl. I kept reminding myself to stay positive and enjoy his improved behavior, but there was an uneasy feeling at the back of my mind that I couldn't ignore. I couldn't let go of our history. Sure, I'd gotten a few compliments and even a hug, but that could never make up for all the years I lost. That evening, as I set the table with my antique gold Minton china for our Christmas Eve dinner, I realized that there were so many things about my father that I didn't know. So much had been left unsaid between us. It's sad that I have so few fond memories of my father. I began to question why he was suddenly behaving differently. Had my mother's death humanized him? Had his dialysis weakened his fighting spirit? Had he finally realized that he was an abusive husband and unloving father? Perhaps he felt he needed to make amends before he died. Or maybe he was just happy that I brought him those damn shrimp. I headed upstairs to my bedroom to change for dinner. As Mario zipped up my gold Michael Kors dress, he tried to calm me. Quit worrying, Ramona. You and your dad are actually getting along. I haven't heard one below the belt jab or condescending comment come out of his mouth in the past 2 days. Just continue to have an open mind and a positive attitude. I stared into the mirror and told myself to stop questioning my father's good behavior, to just enjoy it. After all, who knew how long it would last? Suddenly, it dawned on me. I am in control of how long it will last. I am in control of how my relationship with my father affects me. It's not my father, my husband, nor my daughter. Only me. It occurred to me for the first time that in order to come to peace with myself, I needed to find forgiveness in my heart. I needed to let go of my resentment toward my father and allow myself to release the suppressed feelings of animosity that were holding me back from enjoying this special Christmas Eve, from enjoying life. But that was easier said than done. Before I could explore these thoughts any further, the doorbell rang. It was Mario's best friend, Andrew, and his beautiful girlfriend. Andrew is a warm, handsome man with a down to earth, infectious personality. His girlfriend is an elegant woman who looks like a Ralph Lauren model. We sat at the large, candlelit dining room table. My father sat at one end of the table while Mario sat at the other. We plated and served creamy lobster bisque while I oversaw the portioning of the colossal shrimp. 2 shrimps per plate, please. I smiled at my father. Mario opened a nice bottle of white wine and we said grace. Conversation flowed effortlessly. I do not recall the words that were spoken or the stories that were exchanged, but I do remember the feeling of warmth around the table and the smiles on everyone's faces. My father was polite, even friendly to my guests, especially Andrew's girlfriend, with whom he was shamelessly flirting. I had to hand it to him. Even at the age of 74, he could still admire the grace of a beautiful woman. I couldn't believe that we were all having such a warm, intimate, engaging dinner. It was a far cry from the last holiday that I had spent with my mother 5 years earlier. At that time, my mother was gravely ill, and I wanted her to experience the most special, memorable Christmas. I had bought thousands of dollars worth of Christmas decorations and had even flown in stone crabs from the famous Joe's Stone Crab in Miami. At the last minute, some friends had invited us all over to dinner at their home. We hadn't seen this couple in quite some time, so we decided to join them. That was a huge mistake. Throughout the evening, my father repeatedly insulted our hosts. I was mortified. We ended up losing them as friends. But I told myself, that was then, this is now. I need to forgive, though, not forget the past. Ramona, I heard Mario say, is everything okay? I had fallen into a trance thinking about Christmas past. Before I answered the question, I glanced over at my father. His green eyes were twinkling like Christmas lights. He was genuinely happy, and that made me happy. For the first time in our lives, I was enjoying his company, and he was enjoying mine. It felt like we were real family. This was the best Christmas Eve I could remember in years, and it seemed like it could only get better. Yes, Mario, I smiled. Everything is perfect. That night, my father, Mario, Avery, and I went to midnight mass at the Basilica of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, a beautiful 100-year-old Roman Catholic church in Southampton. I remember my father standing next to me in the pew. We were so close I could feel the warmth of his hand dangling down by his side next to mine. Then, all of a sudden, he grabbed my hand and wove his fingers into mine. I froze in disbelief. This had never happened before. I kept very still, barely daring to breathe, expecting any moment my father would realize what he had done and drop my hand in disgust. But he continued to clasp my hand and in his for mine in his for the rest of the mass. After my initial shock subsided, I felt delighted and exhilarated. The warmth of his hand radiated through my entire body. My heart was so full I felt like it might burst. This was the first time in my life that I had ever held hands with my father. It was like seeing the first snow as a child or opening up presents on Christmas morning. It was the most fantastic feeling in the whole world. Santa Claus had come early for me that year. When it was time for my father to go home, I remember saying goodbye to him at the door and, for the first time in my life, feeling sad to see him leave. Finally, we had connected. I was enjoying his company so much that I wasn't ready for our time to end. Dad, please can't you stay? Do you really need to go so soon? I really want you to stay a little longer, I said. I got very emotional and I started to cry. No, he insisted. I can't stay. I need to get home. I have my dialysis. I have things to do. We'll see each other again soon. He died 2 weeks later. I never got to see my father again. We had finally turned a corner in our relationship, and now he was gone forever. By opening up about my childhood, I have learned that there are many people like me who have been crippled by their past. Maybe my father did the best he could, maybe not. Either way, my childhood was awful, and the memory of it still haunts me to this day. I will never excuse my father's behavior, but for my own sake, for my own happiness, I needed to forgive him. That doesn't mean I will forget the past, but I realized that the hatred and resentment I had been holding on to was self destructive. I finally understood that I needed to move on. I learned the importance of forgiveness for my own well being. I needed to come to terms with my past, what my father did to my mother, and my relationship with him. I needed to do this for myself. Through my father's death, I was released from the negativity that had clouded all of my childhood memories. The toxicity surrounding my life slowly faded away. In its place, I found a sense of peace and forgiveness. I emerged from hell and was brought into the light.